She whispered, "Don't call me Aunty, call me something sweeter." And in that moment, everything changed. It was a quiet evening, the kind where everything around you seems to slow down, and the air feels soft and still. I was at my best friend's house, as usual, the house that had always felt like a second home to me. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the way the light from the kitchen window fell just so, casting a warm glow over the familiar furniture. Or maybe it was the way she stood there, just a little longer than usual, in the center of the kitchen, my best friend's mother. Her name was Leila. She was in her mid-40s, but there was a certain radiance about her that made her seem timeless. She wasn't what most people would call young anymore, but the years had only added a quiet grace to her presence. Tonight, she was wearing a simple white blouse, the fabric soft and slightly wrinkled as if she had been working in the kitchen for a while. Her hair, a deep shade of chestnut, was pulled back in a loose ponytail, strands of it falling softly around her face. Her eyes, though, were the ones that had always held my attention. Warm, rich brown, like they could see straight into you, and tonight, they felt even more intense. I had never really thought much about her in that way. She was always just my friend's mom, someone I'd known since childhood. But tonight, standing in that kitchen, there was something undeniably different. She smiled as I walked in, a welcoming, easy smile, and that simple act made me feel something. It wasn't anything overt. It wasn't like an immediate spark or an obvious attraction, but more of a quiet recognition, like a shift in the air. Something had changed. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her voice warm, familiar. I nodded, still a little unsure of what I was feeling, and moved toward the counter. As I reached for the glass, I felt her presence behind me. The sound of her soft steps, the smell of the dinner she was preparing, the gentle hum of the fridge, all of it suddenly seemed so much more intense. She was standing just a little too close, and for the first time, I noticed how soft the curve of her arm looked as she reached past me to grab a spoon. It was an innocent gesture, one that had happened 100 times before. But tonight, it felt different. Her arm brushed against mine, the lightest touch, but it sent a rush through me, unexpected and confusing. I stepped back, not out of discomfort, but because I needed space to make sense of the surge of emotions that had suddenly caught me off guard. She didn't notice my sudden hesitation, or if she did, she didn't say anything. Instead, she smiled again, this time with an almost knowing quality, as if she understood something I hadn't yet come to terms with. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said casually, and with that, she returned to her preparations. I stood there for a moment, glass in hand, my pulse still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted between us. She hadn't done anything different. She hadn't even looked at me any differently, but somehow, I saw her in a new light. The realization came quietly, almost in a whisper, but it was undeniable. My best friend's mom, Leila, was no longer just an older woman. In that moment, she became something else entirely, something unexpected, something I wasn't sure I could ignore. The lines between us had blurred, and I was unsure how to navigate what had just begun. The days that followed felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. I continued to visit my best friend's house, but now, every interaction with Leila seemed to hold a hidden weight. It wasn't as though she was behaving any differently. No, she was the same as always, warm, kind, easygoing, but something in the air had shifted. Our conversations, once casual and effortless, now felt like they were layered with unspoken words, little moments that held more meaning than I was willing to admit. It was subtle at first. At the beginning, I tried to ignore it, brushing off the increasing awareness of her presence. But she was always there, in the background, just enough to make me feel off balance. It was the way her voice would linger a little longer when she spoke to me. Or how her laugh, which I had heard countless times before, now seemed more melodic, like it was somehow directed at me. She would smile a bit more often when I made a joke or when our eyes would meet across the room. And when she looked at me, there was an intensity in her gaze that I couldn't explain, a quiet curiosity behind those warm brown eyes that made me feel like I was seeing her for the first time. One afternoon, we were sitting outside in her garden. My best friend was off running errands, leaving me alone with her. She was tending to a small patch of flowers, her hands gentle as she worked, but it was the way she moved, so graceful and sure, that caught my attention. There was something hypnotic about watching her, the way the sun caught the edges of her hair, the soft hum of the world around us, the faint scent of blooming roses filling the air. I felt like an intruder in her world, and yet, there was a magnetism I couldn't pull myself away from. As she reached over to hand me a gardening tool, our fingers brushed, just briefly, but the touch felt electric. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked away, trying to mask the sudden rush of heat flooding my face. I could hear the quiet shift in her breathing too, the soft exhale as her hand lingered in the air, and I wondered if she had felt it too. Was it just me? Or was there something more beneath the surface? "Looks like you've got a green thumb," I said, trying to ease the tension, but my voice was thicker than usual. My words didn't come out naturally, my body was still vibrating with the contact of her touch. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "I suppose it's just practice," she replied, but there was something in her tone, something quieter, that made me feel like she wasn't just talking about gardening. Her gaze didn't leave mine, and I felt a flicker of heat in my chest. For a moment, I felt like the world around us had stilled. The next few moments were strangely silent, filled only with the sound of the wind and the occasional chirp of birds. The tension hung between us like a thread, delicate but unbreakable, and it was growing. She wasn't saying anything, but I could feel it in the way she stood, just a little closer than necessary, in the way her eyes held mine just a second too long. The guilt gnawed at me then. I was hyper-aware of the situation. She was my best friend's mother, someone I'd always respected, someone I had always seen as untouchable. And yet, every time our paths crossed now, I found myself fighting the growing pull toward her. The quiet tension between us was impossible to ignore, and I began to wonder whether she was aware of it, or if it was just something I was projecting onto our interactions. But I couldn't keep denying it. There was something between us, something undeniable. And the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. The touch, the lingering looks, the way she seemed to be right there, close, just enough to make me feel like I was falling into something I shouldn't. Something I wasn't sure I could control. Every interaction now felt like an unspoken dance, a delicate balance of what was said and what wasn't. We were caught in it, suspended in attention, waiting for the moment when it could no longer be ignored. It had been a few weeks since that afternoon in the garden, and the tension between Leila and I had only grown. Each visit felt like an unspoken invitation, a pull I couldn't resist. It was strange, though, there were moments when I caught myself hoping for more, wishing for a sign that the feelings swirling between us weren't just figments of my imagination. Yet, she was always careful, never overstepping boundaries, and so, it remained an unacknowledged thing, a quiet, electric current flowing between us but never voiced aloud. That evening, I found myself at her house again, my best friend nowhere to be seen. It wasn't unusual, he often ran off with his own plans, leaving me alone with his mother. But tonight, the house felt eerily quiet. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was about to change. Leila had always been open with me, like an open book, but tonight, there was a different air about her. She had just finished dinner, and the warm scent of roasted chicken and herbs lingered in the kitchen. I sat at the counter, absent-mindedly fiddling with my glass of water, feeling the soft weight of her presence beside me. I didn't mean to start the conversation, but something in me urged me to speak, to finally break the silence that had grown between us. "You're always so busy," I said quietly, watching her as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. She paused for a moment, then turned to face me, her eyes thoughtful. "I suppose I am. It's easy to get caught up in the routine," she said with a soft smile, but there was something heavier behind her words, something I couldn't place. "Yeah, but, sometimes, it feels like people forget you're a person too," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Layla's gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability there that I hadn't noticed before. She set the towel down and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, her gaze never leaving mine. "It's funny, isn't it?" she began, her voice low and almost distant. "How easy it is for people to forget. They get so caught up in their lives, their schedules, they don't stop to think that I'm still here, still have my own needs, my own desires. It gets lonely sometimes." I felt a pang of guilt, though I didn't understand why. I had always seen her as strong, independent, almost invincible in her own way. But hearing her admit this, hearing her speak so openly about her loneliness, shifted something in me. It made me feel small, almost as if I were intruding on a deeply personal moment. I didn't realize," I stammered, unsure how to proceed. The words hung awkwardly in the air, and I wished I could take them back, but it was too late now. She shook her head, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's not your fault," she said, her voice gentle but laced with something heavier. "It's just that, sometimes, I forget what it feels like to be truly seen. Not as a mother, not as a friend, but as myself." The words hung in the air like a quiet confession. I could hear the vulnerability in her voice, feel it in the way she held herself, in the way she seemed to shrink ever so slightly, as if the weight of her words had made her feel exposed. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Something about the raw honesty in her words hit me harder than I expected. "I see you," I said, my voice a little firmer than before. "I see you, Leila." There was a brief pause before she smiled, but it wasn't the usual easy smile she gave. This one was softer, more genuine, like she was grateful for the acknowledgement. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, the air around us seemed to hum with the unspoken words between us. For the first time, I realized that what we were feeling wasn't just fleeting. It was real. It was tangible. And it was dangerous. But as much as I wanted to step forward, to close the distance between us, something held me back. I wasn't ready to cross that line, not yet. The conversation ended there, but the weight of what had been said lingered between us, leaving a quiet, charged atmosphere that neither of us dared to break. It was one of those nights when everything felt just a little bit too still, the air thick with anticipation. I had arrived at Layla's house as usual, but this time, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. My best friend was out with his own plans, leaving me once again alone with her. The house was dimly lit, and the soft glow of the table lamp in the corner seemed to accentuate the quiet between us. We were sitting together on the couch, watching a movie, nothing fancy, just a light comedy. But even the simplicity of the scene seemed charged, as if the space between us had somehow condensed. Leila was seated next to me, but there was an invisible distance I couldn't bridge. The room was filled with the light sound of the television, but my attention was entirely on her, on the way her hand rested on the armrest, on how close she was, yet still far enough to leave a question hanging in the air. For the first time, the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't just innocent companionship anymore. The tension between us was undeniable, thickening with every passing minute, and I felt myself leaning toward her, drawn to the unspoken connection that had been building for weeks. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel her presence beside me, warm and steady. I tried to focus on the movie, but the narrative was lost on me. My thoughts kept returning to her, to the way her laughter had lingered in the room, how her smile felt like an invitation that had gone unacknowledged, like a door left ajar. Then, as if she had been waiting for the perfect moment, Leila leaned closer, her voice a soft whisper, almost lost in the hum of the movie. "Don't call me Aunty, call me something sweeter." Her words, so simple and quiet, seemed to resonate through the room. I turned to her, unsure if I had heard correctly, but her eyes, those warm, brown eyes, held mine with an intensity one couldn't ignore. There was a softness in her gaze now, an openness that made my heart race. She wasn't smiling, but the subtle curve of her lips betrayed a knowing expression, as if she had been waiting for this moment, just as much as I had. The tension in the air deepened. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Her whisper, though soft, had shattered the silence between us, leaving only the quiet understanding that things had changed. I could feel the weight of her invitation, the hidden meaning in her words. She wasn't just speaking about names, about titles. No, she was offering something far deeper, something unspoken but undeniably present. Her words lingered in the space between us, and for the first time, I didn't want to pull away. I didn't want to hide from what was happening. But even as I felt that pull, a part of me hesitated, unsure of where this invitation would lead. The days following Leila's whispered invitation were suffocating with tension. I couldn't escape the weight of her words. "Don't call me Aunty, call me something sweeter." They echoed in my mind at every turn, looping like a song I couldn't shake off, but I didn't know how to respond, how to move forward. The uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me with a deep sense of hesitation. I kept telling myself it was just a slip of the tongue, a playful comment, nothing more. But everything about that moment, the way her eyes held mine, the softness of her voice, the unspoken invitation that lingered in the air, told me otherwise. There was something deeper there, something raw and undeniable that neither of us was ready to confront. I found myself avoiding her, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. Whenever I would arrive at her house, I'd force myself to focus on anything else. I'd throw myself into the mundane tasks of helping around the house or engaging in casual conversation with my best friend, but my eyes would always wander toward Leila. I couldn't help it. The tension between us was palpable, and I was afraid that if I acknowledged it, I'd shatter the fragile barrier between us. Leila, however, was patient. She seemed to sense the shift in me, but she didn't push. She kept her distance, never bringing up that moment again. It was as if she was waiting for me to find the courage to meet her halfway, to acknowledge what had passed between us, but every time I saw her, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something dangerous, unsure if I should jump or retreat. One evening, she asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. I agreed, knowing I was only fooling myself with the pretense of avoiding her. The meal was simple, yet the way she moved around the kitchen, her soft hum as she worked, kept me on edge. Every motion seemed laden with unspoken words. I tried to focus on the food, on the small talk, but her presence was overwhelming. After dinner, we moved to the living room. She sat down beside me on the couch, just like she always did, but tonight the closeness felt different. I could feel the space between us shrinking, her presence encroaching upon my every thought. I knew I was being foolish, that the emotional wall I had built between us was only growing stronger the more I resisted her. Her eyes flicked toward mine, and for a moment, the world around us faded. She wasn't speaking, but her gaze was heavy with something unspoken, something I was too afraid to acknowledge. She reached for her teacup, her fingers brushing against mine, and I felt the soft tremor in my hand as I pulled away. I hated myself for the hesitation, for the way I couldn't simply embrace what had been growing between us. But I couldn't help it. Fear gripped me, fear of what this could mean, fear of the consequences if we crossed this line. I had always seen her as untouchable, my best friend's mother, and now the realization that she might feel the same way about me made my heart race with both excitement and dread. The hesitation lingered, and I couldn't help but wonder, was I ready to let go of everything I thought I knew and take that step towards something uncertain, something undeniably real? Or would I continue to let fear keep us apart, never truly understanding what might have been? It had been a week since I had last seen Leila, and the tension between us had only grown more pronounced. I tried to bury it beneath the routine of daily life, but no matter how much I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, it wasn't. Every time I walked into her house, every time our paths crossed, I felt it, the weight of the unspoken words, the quiet understanding between us that something had shifted. I was no longer just a guest in her home. I was something else, something more. I couldn't run from it anymore. The truth had been sitting in the back of my mind for too long, whispering at the edges of my thoughts. It was time to face it, to acknowledge the tension that had been building since that fateful evening when she whispered to me, "Don't call me Aunty, call me something sweeter." I knew the conversation was inevitable, and that night, it happened. My best friend was out again, and it was just me and Leila. The house was unusually quiet, the evening light casting soft shadows across the room. We were sitting in the living room, the silence between us heavy. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to find the right words. Every time I looked at her, I saw something different, a woman who wasn't just my best friend's mother but someone I was falling for, someone I couldn't ignore anymore. Leila, sensing my internal struggle, turned to me with a gentle, knowing smile. "You've been distant lately," she said, her voice soft but direct. "Is everything okay?" I could see the concern in her eyes, the way she carefully watched me, waiting for me to open up. And for the first time in weeks, I did. I took a deep breath and told her everything, the confusion, the fear, the emotions I had been struggling with ever since that night. I told her how the lines between us had blurred, how I couldn't stop thinking about her, and how scared I was to admit it. Leila didn't interrupt, didn't try to brush my feelings aside. Instead, she listened, really listened, her gaze steady and patient. When I finished speaking, she sat back for a moment, her hands resting gently in her lap. Then, without hesitation, she smiled softly and said, "I've been waiting for you to say it." Her words hit me like a wave, washing over me with a mix of relief and disbelief. I had expected rejection, fear, or discomfort, but instead, she was offering understanding, even reassurance. She had felt it too, this unspoken connection between us, and she hadn't shied away from it. Her gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand lightly resting on mine. The touch was so simple, yet it spoke volumes. It was gentle, warm, and full of understanding, like she was silently telling me that we were in this together. In that moment, all the fear, all the hesitation, seemed to melt away. The emotional wall I had built between us cracked, and the space that had felt so heavy before now felt inviting. There was no longer uncertainty, no longer fear of what might happen if we crossed this line. We had already crossed it. The world around us felt suspended for just a moment, as if time itself had paused to let us breathe, to let us simply be in the truth of what was unfolding. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I knew we were ready for it. The days after that conversation felt lighter, freer. I could breathe again. There was no longer the heavy weight of unspoken words between us, no longer that oppressive silence whenever our gazes met. Everything had shifted, and now, there was an undeniable clarity between Leila and me. It was as though a door had been opened, one that neither of us had dared to cross until now. The dynamic between us had changed, but in the best way possible. We no longer felt like two people stuck in the in-between, unsure of where to go or what to say. We were simply two people, two adults, ready to face whatever this new connection was. The moments between us were quieter now, but they were filled with understanding. And more than anything, they were filled with the kind of comfort that came from knowing we were on the same page. I found myself looking at her differently, not just as my best friend's mother, but as someone who had become an integral part of my world. The affection that had once felt confusing was now natural, easy. We'd sit together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing pieces of our lives that we'd kept hidden for too long. Each conversation felt like a small revelation, a discovery of who we were to one another. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. The air was calm, the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm has passed. I could feel her presence beside me, steady and reassuring. Our hands were close, but not touching. But the proximity felt right. There was no need for hurried words or gestures. Finally, after a long silence, Leila spoke, her voice soft but full of something I couldn't place. "You know," she began, her gaze focused on the setting sun, "I've always thought that love comes when you least expect it. But sometimes, it comes when you're ready for it. When you're ready to let go of the walls you've built around yourself." I turned to look at her, her profile bathed in the warm glow of the fading sunlight. She looked content, peaceful, like someone who had come to terms with the changes in her life. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about a sudden attraction. It wasn't about the age difference, or the expectations that had always existed between us. It was about connection, about two people who had finally seen each other for who they really were. Her hand brushed mine, just lightly, but the touch was everything. The tenderness, the reassurance, the quiet promise that whatever this was, it was real. There was no need to rush, no need to define it immediately. We were taking our time, letting the connection unfold at its own pace. We didn't need to say anything more. In that moment, everything was understood. We had both come to terms with what was between us, and we were willing to let it grow naturally. There was no fear, no hesitation left. It was just us, together, moving forward, embracing the sweetness of what had begun.